We are continuing our coverage of Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers with another slate of cards. I don't know if this will be the last line of them because I think there may be a few more reveals trickling in before we get to the Commander and Box Topper stuff, but we'll find out as we go. Either way, let's jump into the video. All right, everybody, thanks so much for being here, and thanks for checking out the videos. As always, I really appreciate it. And this has been a fun spoiler season, too, because this set is really shaping up to be an awesome set, and I think it's going to be really fun for drafting with a lot of new mechanics, but it's also really going to shake up multiple formats, and that's always cool to see when you get a set that's going to have that kind of impact, and I definitely think this is one of them. We haven't even seen the Commander decks yet, so that's a whole nother thing that we're, going to be hopefully looking at a little bit later this week to see what's worth it and what isn't. Now, if you guys haven't done so already, please go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to stay notified for future updates and videos. It is extremely helpful to me and to the channel, and it only takes a second. So if you enjoy what I do here, I would very much appreciate that. But let's jump into the cards, and we're going to start off with Molten Collapse. There are a lot of alternate art or borderless cards in the set. I feel like a little more than usual, and I'm not really talking about the box toppers or the other stuff either. I'm just saying in general in the set. So I'm interested to see how that kind of ends up shaking up, because I think there's some borderless like commons and uncommons that are part of the main set, and I don't know, I mean, I know it's happened a couple times, but it's typically not super frequent that happens. So Molten Collapse is 1 black, 1 red sorcery. Choose one. If you've descended this turn, you may choose both instead. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. So the descending mechanic just says if a permanent was put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, so not exactly super hard to pull off. This is pretty low to the ground, low cost creature or planeswalker removal, and destroying a non-land permanent, I mean, I guess in Commander, like, you can get rid of a Soul Ring, you can get rid of Mana Crypt, stuff like that. Or any one cost, artifact. I don't know too often, like, what is really going to be the best target for that secondary effect, but this is still a 2-mana destruction spell that can get over creatures or planeswalkers and may be able to help out in some niche situations to get rid of other things too. Resplendent Angel is 1 and 2 white angel with flying. At the beginning of each end step, if you gain 5 or more life this turn, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. You can pay 3 white until end of turn. Resplendent Angel gets +2/+2 and gains lifelink. So the thing about this that really stands out right off the bat is the fact that the life gain does not have to trigger just during your turn. So if you have ways to gain life during your opponent's turn as well, you can keep spamming tokens during each end phase, and that's obviously really good. And her own effect allows you the ability to gain life and, get lifelink as well as a buff. So it's kind of can fulfill its own condition, and it's only 3 mana to play. So there's a lot to like about this card. I understand why it's a mythic. I definitely think in standard it's going to have some application, but those angel decks are pretty popular across the board, and even with the recent Secret Lair, what is the angel? I forget what it is, when angels fly or whatever it's called. Secret Lair could definitely slot something like this in quite nicely. Restless Vents. The Restless cycle continues, and again, they are tap lands, so they are a bit limited in that regard. So tap for black or red, pay 1 black-red until end of turn. It becomes a 2/3 black-red insect creature with menace. It's still a land. Whenever it attacks, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. It's decent. It's definitely on the better end of the Restless cycle that we've gotten so far. I wouldn't call it anything crazy, but certainly being able to fix your hand and the menace dealing some extra damage is nice. It's just, again, coming into play tapped automatically puts it in a bit of a tough spot. Unless maybe there's, some land decks, the 5-color decks that can revolve around land creatures, and I guess there's maybe slots for it there if you can find a way to make that work. Speaking of uncommons that are pretty good, Earthshaker Dreadmaw. This is a borderless. It looks really nice. It is 4 green creature dinosaur with trample. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other dinosaur you control. Now, while it is a little costly, there are a lot of cards in the set, some we haven't even talked about yet and some we have, that allow you to bring dinosaurs out a lot more easily. Of course, the new Galta allows you to bring cards out right from the hand, and Gishath can bring dinos out from the top of the deck. You could drop this and have a bunch of other dinos come out at the same time, and you're drawing a good amount of cards. Just not bad for dinosaurs, especially for Commander. I don't, obviously I don't see this as like a good standard card necessarily, but it's definitely a neat card, and I think it's going to be something that will have a place. It's really good resource management, and it's, trample on a 6/6 body to boot. Terror Tide is 2 black sorcery with Fathomless Descent. All creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So it's kind of like a mix of like Damnation and Toxic Deluge, but Standard doesn't have a lot of board wipes, and this does cost the same as Damnation. So in some cases, if you're playing a deck where you can fill up the grave kind of quick, I can actually see this being really useful. And again, it gets around the indestructible effects because it's minusing the stats. So, you know, it's not great. It's probably going to be like cute in drafts, and it might see some play in Standard. I do think it's outclassed in Commander by Toxic Deluge and Damnation, but still, it does have its uses if you ask me. Pugnacious Hammerskull, some insane artwork again, which really seems to be the theme of the set here. 2 and a green. It's a dinosaur that says whenever it attacks while you don't control another dinosaur, put a stun counter on it. What that means is it doesn't, next time it would untap during the untap step, if it has a stun counter, you have to remove the counter instead. So you're paying a very low mana cost to get out a big creature, but if you don't have another dinosaur, it can't attack. Basically, it has to sit out for a turn before it can untap, which is exceptionally slow, but if you're playing it with other dinosaurs, it can definitely be something that is going to deal a lot of damage right off the bat, and if you can avoid that stun counter penalty that comes along with it, you're going to be in good shape. Restless Ridgeline, another Restless Cycle card. Pretty straightforward here. Red-green, enters tapped. You pay 2 red-green. It becomes a 3/4 red and green dinosaur creature until end of turn that is still a land. Whenever it attacks, another target attacking creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Then untap that creature. So, actually, I mean, one of the better ones, I think, being able to untap something that's maybe swung for a lot of damage and then have it as a blocker next turn is not bad. I'll say it every time we talk about these. It's just the fact that they come out tapped is definitely going to be a detriment. But they all have some beautiful artwork, and I could see them having, you know, niche uses in certain scenarios, maybe as budget options if you don't have better lands. Kishana's Tidebinder is 2 and a blue creature merfolk wizard with flash. When it enters battlefield, counter up to 1 target activated or triggered ability. If an ability of an artifact creature or planeswalker is countered this way, that permanent loses all abilities for as long as Kishana's Tidebinder remains on the battlefield. Mana abilities can't be targeted. So it's actually kind of like the closest thing to a hand trap for my Yu-Gi-Oh players that we have to respond to something. And there's a couple other cards like this, but what I find kind of interesting about it is the fact that it loses the rest of its abilities permanently as long as this is out, which definitely makes it relatively strong in certain decks, and I do think this is probably going to see a lot of Standard play. But there's probably, I mean, in general, Merfolk have gotten a lot of support, and I think Merfolk Tribal is looking like it's going to have a lot more potential with some of the new cards, and presumably more as we get the actual reveals for the Commander decks. So I'm excited to see it, but this is a pretty solid card for what it is. Now, this card here is Commander only. Well, Commander in Legacy formats, you know, Vintage, whatever, but it's not Standard legal. That's basically the point I'm trying to get at here. I didn't realize that till after I started prepping for the video. I was going to do the Commander stuff separately, but here we are. So, it's Chimil the Inner Sun, and it costs 6. It's a legendary artifact. It says spells you control can't be countered. At the beginning of your end step, discover 5. Discover, if you missed some of the previous videos, is essentially Cascade, but a little bit weaker because you look at 5, and then if you basically find a non-land card mana cost 5 or less, you can cast it free or add it to your hand, but it's still free cards, and this is really good for that reason, but also not being able to have any of your spells countered means creatures with ward, you really don't have to worry about them, because the wording of ward suggests that it is a targeting. So if you have a creature spell that you're casting that would like target something, or any spell you're playing that would target something, it can get around ward. However, remember that ward is still, you know, if it's a creature ability, that's different because it's just the spells you control that can't be countered. So just something to remember. But if you play a card like Play with Fire or something, to try to pop a creature and it has ward, while you have this card out, you're able to go ahead and pop that. Akal Pakal, first among equals, is 2 and a blue, legendary creature, human advisor. At the beginning of each player's end step, if an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. It's not bad if you have ways to consistently get artifacts out, maybe like treasure tokens or even some of the new like map tokens. You know, being able to fill up your graveyard and also get some extra resources is never a bad thing, especially with all the new cards that like care about the number of permanents in grave. I think this card's pretty solid and definitely going to be a decent inclusion in certain things. Echoing Deeps is actually a pretty noteworthy one. This is a cave, so more caves. There's a lot of them, and including in the common and uncommon slots that are pretty solid. You may have Echoing Deeps enter the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land card in a grave, except it's a cave in addition to its other types. Now, it can tap for colorless, but again, think about the combo potential you have here to make copies of pretty much anything. You know, lands with abilities, fetch lands. I mean, there's so many different things you can do to kind of fill up the graveyard. And obviously, you know, fetch lands aren't legal in Standard, but the interesting thing about fetch lands is they combo really well with some of these new cards that want to like get stuff in grave, or the descend mechanic. You can kind of use those to fill up your grave quickly. So I could see Modern maybe being able to make use of some of those, and obviously Commander in formats where fetch lands are legal. I know in Pioneer they are not. So you know, kind of pick and choose. But cards like this just really solid, you know, as a whole, and it's like very Thespian Stage-esque, while being a little bit different in the sense that it's still treated as a cave and it enters tapped as a copy, versus, you know, just kind of becoming a copy. It's entering. Forgotten Monument just is a cave tapped to add colors, but it also can turn all of your caves into mana confluence, essentially. So you pay 1 life, add a mana of any color. This is a really good uncommon that doesn't even enter tapped. So if you're playing something with caves, there are a lot of them now, and I do think there might be some really interesting ways to make it work. I do like that they've taken a new land subtype and actually created like a significant amount of cards around them, and they definitely feel stronger than like Gates, even though Gates do have like a win condition. Many of them are relatively weak by comparison. Carrion Soul Cleaver is a 1-drop legendary artifact equipment. The equipped creature has vigilance. Whenever another artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. Equip 2. What's cool about this, in addition to being basically a sort of a hybrid Shadow Spear, but not as good, is that you and or your opponent sacrificing treasure tokens or other things are going to just beef this creature up. So if you're playing a treasure-heavy deck where you're sacrificing multiple, every time you do that, a creature's going to get a +1/+1 counter, and it's got vigilance, so you can get things very large very quickly with this. And that can definitely be, you know, a useful thing to have access to, especially for such a low-cost artifact. Decks like, you know, any equipment-based strategies or Voltron decks are probably going to want to play this just because of the ability that it offers to hit for massive damage for a very low-risk investment. Thousand Moons Smithy is 2 white legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may tap 5 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, transform Thousand Moons Smithy. So you get a gnome. It's very similar to like an artifact construct token. Its power and toughness equal to artifacts and creatures, so it can be relatively strong, all things considered, if you have a decent amount of creatures. But it transforms into Barracks of the Thousand, a legendary artifact land that can tap to add white. It says whenever you cast an artifact or creature spell using mana produced by Barracks of the Thousand, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power toughness is equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. So if you can consistently keep using this each turn, or even if you have ways to untap your lands, you can just keep making these gnome tokens that are going to be massive if you're really starting to build them up. I mean, you know for a fact they're already going to come out as a 2/2 because this is an artifact and the gnome itself is an artifact. So you can really see where like some kind of token spam in combination with some of the other new cards we've got seems like it might shape up to be a pretty viable strategy for this deck. Finally, for this video, O'Hare Kaslem, Deepest Growth. Again, probably mispronounced it. Maybe it's Kaslem. I don't know. 3 green, legendary creature, God with Trample. When it deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. You may put a creature or a land from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. When this card dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control. So, I mean, dealing combat damage, it's a 6/5, so it's probably going to hit for 6 if it's swinging direct, or like maybe piercing the trample. Being able to put creatures and lands on top of the battlefield can generate some pretty significant resources and just basically board presence for you. And if you combo this with ways to stack your deck, you can basically ensure you're going to get something out. It's definitely a really interesting card that I think might be one of the stronger of the transforming gods they've given us this set. But this transforms into Temple of Cultivation, tap to add green, and then 2 and a green transform, activate only if you control 10 or more permanents and only as a sorcery. So again, like the other gods, it can flip back into its other side, which means you can continue to use it on later turns. And it's just, yeah, it's really solid as a whole. And again, it's basically unkillable because when you kill it, it comes back transformed and then you can turn it over. You have to exile it to get rid of it, and that's, you know, not always the easiest thing to do with you have limited options. Although in Commander, I suppose if you're playing white, you do have access to things like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile that can get rid of this. If you don't get rid of it, it's going to be a problem, I think, because it's just a really powerful card. So that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think of this slate of reveals so far. Be sure to keep checking back this week for more reveals and updates as we go. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.